Hey there, I'm Pastor Luis. We're going to get right back into our studies as we follow the life of Jesus Christ. So we've been following Jesus as he goes south from Galilee, the center of his ministry, and he's heading back down to Judea. And he is going to encounter a man alongside of a pool, and he chooses him for a spectacular miracle. Now the question is, how will everyone respond to that miracle? Well, I'm excited to jump into the study and find out what is the response of the people when Jesus heals the man by the pool at Bethesda. So let's get started. Let's open our Bibles to the Gospel of John chapter 5. The Gospel of John chapter 5. Let's look at verse 1. Right off the bat, it's giving us information that I think is important for us to know. We know that Jesus has based his ministry out of Galilee up in the north, specifically Capernaum. He's come down, though, because something is happening in Jerusalem. And from verse 1, it's going to tell us what I think it is. It says, after this, there was a feast of the Jews. Now we know that there are 7 feasts from the book of Leviticus chapter 23. 3 of those feasts, it was mandatory for people to show up and participate in Jerusalem. I think this is one of them. If we were to jump ahead one chapter to the Gospel of John chapter 6 verse 4, I think what we find is it is the Feast of Passover. So this is a huge feast. Jesus has been making his way down south from Galilee through Samaria. He met a woman at the well there. He shows up here in Judea. He heals a nobleman's son. And now we find ourselves. It says, after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now, verse 2. There is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, in Aramaic called Bethesda. So let's take a moment and analyze. What should we know here about verse 2? It says there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool. Let's take a step back. Let's imagine that Jesus is now in the temple. He's walking around. He's careful because people recognize him. They've heard about his miracles. He's got opposition growing. But it seems like God has provided him just a moment. And he's in the northern part of the temple. And he's standing on one of the walls. If you were to look at a map of the temple, we know that the temple has 8 gates. The one at the furthest north is called the sheep gate. It's specifically mentioned here in verse 2. So imagine Jesus standing on the wall, looking down upon the sheep gate. He would have looked beyond it and he would have noticed the fortress of Antonia. He would have looked behind himself if he were to turn around and he would have noticed the Garden of Gethsemane. And further to the north was the pool that is going to be mentioned here in Bethesda. So Jesus is standing there on the wall and he's looking down at what is called the sheep gate. Why was it called that? It was called that because of the feast that they're about to celebrate. Every year, thousands of sheep would enter through this gate. And I can almost imagine, it might just be me, but I can almost imagine Jesus looking at that gate, imagining thousands of bleeding sheep going through that gate. And that door would have represented, at that moment, death. The sheep are going in, but they're not coming out. They're lost, there's chaos, there's noise. These sheep that are all afraid are going in to their death. And I think Jesus would have thought that through. He would have meditated on it. And the reason I say this is because soon after, Jesus is going to begin to refer to us as sheep. And the Bible says that when Jesus looked upon the people in Jerusalem, it said that he had compassion for them. He had an incredible sense of compassion because he said they're like sheep without a shepherd. And you see all these sheep going to their death. And they're going through this sheep gate. And I think that's why later in the Gospel of John chapter 10 and on, Jesus is going to refer to himself and he's going to say, I am the gate. I am the door for the sheep. And he'll say, I am the good shepherd. My sheep, they hear my voice and they follow me. And so he's looking at this gate that represents death, where thousands of sheep are going into the holy place, but they're being lost. The religious leaders are literally killing the sheep. And Jesus says, I am a good shepherd. My sheep know me. They hear my voice. I am the door. I am the way, the truth, and the life. My door leads to life. I care for my sheep. And so I'm imagining Jesus just formulating some of the things that he's about to say in the next few chapters. Jesus is our good shepherd. He cares and he sees how chaotic the sheep are living, and the direction they're going to is death. And so it says here in verse 2 that there was in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool. So as he analyzes that gate, he looks on further north, and just ahead of him is a pool. And so he's going to go there, called Bethesda. Now, the word Bethesda, there's lots of names that I think are important. This one says that it is in Aramaic called Bethesda. In some Bibles it may say Hebrew. And so when I look at that name, I know that the word beit in Hebrew means house. And the second part of the Bethesda, it might be the Hebrew word hasad, which means kindness or mercy. So at least from my perception, this pool, this place is called a house of mercy, a house of kindness, or might we even say a house of grace. So I want you to think about the picture that is being painted here. You have all these sheep that are lost, that are going to their death. They're entering through a door they will not come out of. No one cares. The leadership is about to destroy them. And now Jesus is describing himself as the good shepherd. He is the door. He leads to life. And now he's going into a place just north of the sheep gate, and it's called a place of grace, a place of kindness, a place where you can find mercy. And so it goes on in the text. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. Basically the colonnades are a roof. So if you can imagine a square or rectangle building, and then it has one more roof right down the center, or at least an extension in the center. So it's letting you know it's a big area, and the area is roofed. It says here that in verse 3, in these lay a multitude of invalids. I don't know how much a multitude is, but I have a feeling it's just a lot of people, and they all have different problems. Some are blind, some are lame, some are paralyzed. And it says in verse 5, one man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. What does that mean, an invalid? Some have said that he was paralyzed. We honestly don't know. The truth is, he has a weakness. There's something that keeps him from being at 100%. And before we go any further, remember, we've got to find a way that this applies to us too. And so my question to you as you go through this Bible study with me is, do you have a weakness? Is there something that has affected you and you can say, yeah, that's an area where I just don't have strength. In that area, I'm really hurting. Well, this man had been an invalid for 38 years. Should we pay attention to that? Well, the only thing I could offer you is when you study in the book of Exodus, in the book of Numbers, the people who are wandering in the desert. We're accustomed to saying that Moses led the nation of Israel as they wandered for 40 years in the desert. But if you analyze that first year and a half, they weren't under any curse. God was working with them. It wasn't until his patience was done with their lack of faith and trust and with their disobedience. So it was a couple years into it that he said, from this point forward, this generation, they're not going to enter into the promised land. So the actual curse of wandering in Kadesh Barnea, around the circles in the wilderness, is actually 38 years. So when we look at this text, is there any connection? I'm not sure, but it's something to think about. So the nation of Israel wandered in circles for 38 years not progressing, not advancing. This man has been struggling with a weakness, an invalid. He's at this pool with a multitude of other people, and what has he been doing? He's been simply circling this pool. He's been wandering, if you will, in this one place. Verse 6 says that when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" Now for some of us, of course, wouldn't it be obvious that if we've been struggling with a weakness, we would want to be healed? Why would Jesus say something that appears so insensitive? Well, the truth is that Jesus is revealing what we've been noticing all along. Jesus has presented himself as a man who knows the hearts of men. He knows what they're thinking. He knows their motivations. He knows what's happening in their hearts and in their minds. And apparently, he knows something about this specific man. There is a multitude of people, but Jesus has a divine appointment with this one man. And knowing his heart, knowing his mind, Jesus asks him, "Do you want to be healed?" And the truth is that there are those who are so broken, they are so used to and accustomed to their pain that you need to ask them, because they become so accustomed to their pain and suffering that they don't know anything else. They're literally afraid of being healed. And if you can imagine, and I'm just making the situation up, but imagine someone who has been, for instance, in a wheelchair for the majority of their life. And because they have been in a wheelchair, their entire life has been shaped around that wheelchair. So their income, the way they interact with society, the expectations, it's all revolving around that wheelchair. But if they were to lose the wheelchair, what would have to happen? What would change? Maybe they don't receive the same kind of attention, the same kind of consideration. Now they have to go get a job. They've never had a job. Well, I mean, I'm just making something up to show you it would be a drastic change in their life. And for some people, that scares them more than their actual weakness. Jesus feels that it's important to ask this man, do you want to be healed? Are you willing to live your life different? No longer dependent on the people that come and feed you, the people that give you offerings of money. I mean, this is how you've shaped your life. Are you ready for something different? And isn't that the same way for all of us when we come to church? That place of grace, the place of kindness, the place of mercy, where we're all invited. You've heard the example. The church isn't a place of perfect people. It's a hospital. It's a place where people with weaknesses come. And Jesus is there. And he focuses in on one man. He says, do you want to be healed? I know you feel bad and I know you're struggling, but do you want to be healed? Are you ready for something different? I just think that's a good question for all of us to think about. And the Bible continues on here, and it says, verse 7, the sick man answered and said, Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. I want you to notice something. He says, I have no one to put me in when the water is stirred up. If you were following along in the reading, did you notice what happened with verse 4? Because if you have a King James Version Bible, you would have read in verse 4 about this idea or this concept that every now and then an angel would have come down, he would have stirred the waters, and whoever gets in the pool of water first has a miraculous healing. But if you have a New American Standard, an English Standard Version, an RSV, different types of Bibles that are more modern, they don't include verse 4. It jumps from verse 3 to verse 5. Why is that? The King James Version Bible, if you refer back to some of my previous videos on the Bible itself, they were translated from different texts. The English Standard Version that I'm using right now, it comes from some ancient texts, what we call the Alexandrian texts. That would have been 2nd and 3rd century texts. And so it would have been some of the most early documents that we can translate. The King James Version, which uses the Textus Receptus, it would have used Byzantine texts, which are 4th century and on, the majority being 6th century, 7th century, but they would have been later texts. So when Bible translators looked at this, they said the earliest text, the Alexandrian text, they don't include this angel coming and stirring of the water. The Byzantine text, the later texts do. So they made some decisions, and based on the type of Bible that you are using, will determine whether or not you have verse 4 or not. So in verse 7, the man is saying here in verse 7, the sick man answered and said, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool." You notice he's not answering Jesus' question. Jesus asked him, "Do you want to be healed?" He comes out with a sad story. He says, "Sir, I don't have anyone. Anytime the water is stirred, anytime I have a chance, I'm crawling my way over there. I'm trying to get, but someone always jumps ahead of me. Someone always pushes me back. Things don't work out for me." I don't mean to be disrespectful, but can you hear the violins in the background? He's really sad. The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I'm going, another one steps down before me." That's not what Jesus asked you. He wanted to know, do you want to be healed? This man has focused so much attention on his weakness, so much attention on his problem, that he doesn't recognize who is standing before him. Someone that cares for him. Someone that can heal him, someone that has the very power of life. And so verse 8 says, Jesus said to him, "Get up, take up your bed and walk." So Jesus doesn't wait for the answer, he simply gives him the answer. Get up, I am going to take care of you. Time out. This is important for us to discuss here. Did this man in any way, shape, or form demonstrate faith? Is it this man's faith that allows him to receive this miracle? I think you're going to notice as you do your study in the Bible, this man demonstrates no faith. Jesus is doing something not because of the man, but because of who he is. And so I think there's an argument here where we can talk about how miracles are not based on our abilities or our willingness, but rather on the power, the grace, and the kindness and mercy of God. As we go to verse 8, Jesus said to him, "Get up, take up your bed, and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and he walked. This is good news. This is amazing. Even though this man didn't anticipate it, he didn't ask for it, his faith didn't achieve it, Jesus blesses this man, and he can now do what he has not been able to do for 38 years. The next part of this verse, though, brings up a big point. Now that day was the Sabbath. This is a problem. And we're going to find that out really quick. Verse 10, so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to take up your bed." But he answered them, "The man who healed me, that man said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" I want you to notice what's going on here. The Jewish authorities, who are already against Jesus, they're already looking to engage in conflict with him. They're following up with this man, and the only thing they see is a man violating the rules. And I think that the Jewish leadership here represents legalism, where we should be celebrating. This man has been an invalid for 38 years. What would you tell him? Personally, me, I'd say get up and run. You should run. You should enjoy. You have legs. You've got new life. But what happens here with the Jewish people? Instead of celebrating, instead of recognizing the miraculous power of God, they focus in on rules that have been broken. It's not even the law of God, it's the Pharisaic laws that they're concerned with. And verse 12, they asked him, "Who is the man who you said told you to take up your bed and walk?" They want to know who to blame. They don't see a blessing, they see a violation. And this man, who by the way demonstrated no faith, is really quick to throw Jesus under the bus. This is something that you and I need to notice. This man was really quick to throw Jesus at the authorities and blame him. You just were given such an amazing gift, and so quickly you're ready to throw Jesus to the wolves. Verse 13. Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, and there was a crowd in the place. Verse 14, though, says, afterward, Jesus found him. The man didn't find him. Jesus found him in the temple, and he said to him, see, you're well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. I really feel like it's important to focus in on this. Because you see, we would say that the man's weakness, the greatest problem, was that he couldn't walk. But if you notice, Jesus says, you are well physically, but sin no more. Why not? Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. What is that talking about? What I think Jesus is saying here is this. Sir, your biggest issue wasn't your inability to walk. It wasn't your weakness. It was your lack of faith. The miracle happened absent of your faith. I have blessed you, but you have a serious faith issue. And for you to have a truly great future, that's the sin that you shouldn't continue. Now that you've seen what I'm capable of doing, what I'm willing to do, trust me, follow me, have faith in me. Because if you don't, if you continue to walk in unbelief, then something worse. What is that? Eternal separation from God Himself. It's going through that sheep gate. It's dying. You may have a physical body, but spiritually, you're still dead. The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. I don't see this man growing in faith. I see this man saying, hey, there's the guy. There's the guy you should go and blame and yell at. And this was why, the verse says in verse 16, and this is why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, my Father is working until now, and I am working. I think we're going to close it down here because we need to recognize, how is Jesus responding? The Gospel of John, the main intent, if you remember, is to demonstrate who Jesus is. And Jesus, like he did in the temple, will once again say, my Father. My Father is working, and he may be going back to Psalm 121, verses 3 through 4, where this is quoted by the psalmist. He who keeps Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. And what Jesus is saying is, my Father is always working. And because he's working, so am I. I and the Father, we're one. We're together. I'm doing these miracles. I'm working on the Sabbath because I am the Son of God. So as we close down in this Bible study for a moment, I want you to think about what we've read. Jesus has compassion on all of us. And because he is God, he sees us all like those sheep that go through the sheep gate, lost without a shepherd, doomed to an eternal destruction. And he finds a man by the pool who demonstrates the same weaknesses we all have. All of us have a weakness. And yet he comes to us at the place of kindness, at the place of mercy, of grace. And he invites us to trust in him. And even though we lack faith, he blesses us. And he tells us, this isn't your biggest issue. The issue is the relationship you have with me. Trust me. Walk with me so that your sin doesn't equal something worse in the future. Why should you trust him? Because he and the Father are one. He is the Son of God, and you can trust him. So, has this been a blessing for you? I hope it has. I hope it's given you a lot to consider. We'll continue our study in the next video, but till then, remember, I'm always pulling for you. So what do you think? If you enjoyed this video, then make sure you click on the like button below and leave me a comment. And make sure to subscribe for even more amazing content. And remember, I'm always pulling for you.